I knew something was off the second I arrived. It was December. The kind of December that makes you feel nostalgic and bitter in the same breath. My boots crunched against gravel as I pulled my suitcase up the stone driveway of my aunt's beach villa. I hadn't seen him in weeks. He'd been working on a new project and had gone quiet. But this trip was supposed to make up for that. Supposed to be ours. A reset. I even wore the green dress he once said made me look like money and poetry at the same time. I wasn't prepared for the ambush. The moment I stepped through the archway, I heard laughter. Not just the warm, disarming kind. No, the performative kind. My mother looked startled to see me. My aunt pretended to be surprised. But there was too much makeup on her face, too much tension around her smile. And then I saw him, standing beside her. Elise. My cousin. My wealthier, prettier, magazine-glossed cousin. The one with the Cartier watch and the grandfather who named a scholarship after her. She was wearing my perfume, holding his hand. I blinked, then blinked again. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was hallucinating from the long flight. But no. There they were, posing for a picture beside the fire, like a royal announcement. He turned to me finally, as if just noticing my presence. And I'll never forget his words. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "This isn't what it looks like." Just, "You came? I thought your invite got lost in the mail." And Elise, my blood, my sandbox playmate, my backstabbing Barbie doll, chimed in, wrapping an arm around him like a coronation sash. We wanted it to be a surprise. Surprise. I didn't say a word. Didn't cry. Didn't run. I walked out into the garden and sat under the palm trees while laughter filtered out through the windows behind me. I looked up at the stars and did the math. He left me for her. Not just anyone. Her. The cousin who always had everything and still wanted more. The family? They'd known. They helped plan it. My mother had helped pick out the ring. I stared at the house. At the lights. At the champagne flutes clinking like distant gunfire. That's when the crack formed, not in my heart, but in something deeper, something colder. And in that silence, I made a vow. If they wanted a storybook ending, I'd give them one. Only this time, I was going to write it. Not with emotion. Not with tears. Not with confrontation. But with time. And law. And leverage. They thought they had won. They had no idea. I was just getting started. Underscore 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 underscore. You don't realize how deep the rock goes until the silence sets in. No one called me after the trip. Not my mom. Not Elise. Not him. And it wasn't because they were avoiding me. It was because, to them, it was done. The choice had been made. The family had closed ranks, and I was no longer a part of the inner circle. Just a footnote with a heartbeat. My mother called once. A week later. To tell me I had embarrassed her with my behavior. "You could have at least said congratulations," she hissed. "Don't act like a bitter little girl." Funny thing is, I hadn't acted bitter. Not at all. But they were angry that I hadn't played along. That I hadn't smiled through the betrayal like a well-raised pawn. The golden cousin. The charity cousin. That was always the narrative. I grew up in their borrowed shadows. My dad died when I was 12 and my mother, her pride too brittle to beg, accepted temporary help from her sister, Elise's mom. That temporary help became years of conditions. We lived in a pool house behind their mansion. 8 leftovers plated to look like gifts. I wore Elise's old clothes, Elise's name stitched into the tag, crossed out in Sharpie. It didn't matter that I worked twice as hard in school, that I aced the SATs, that I got into law school on my own merit. What mattered was image, bloodline, money. I was never the girl who would belong, just the one who should be grateful for proximity. That trip sealed it. So I left. I deleted my social media, packed up my apartment, told no one. I didn't even take the cat. I moved 3 states away, rented a micro-unit downtown, and started bartending while enrolling in night classes. Law school wasn't a dream. It was a weapon I'd kept sheathed for too long. The girl they'd written off? She was sharpening teeth in silence now. I kept a spreadsheet. Every favor Elise ever received from the family. Every company they had partial stake in. Every entity her trust was connected to. Every board her name sat on. It wasn't obsession. It was research. And through it all, I stayed quiet. Quiet when I overheard her name come up in financial circles. Quiet when I realized her trust was structured through a boutique firm I'd just been hired at part-time. Quiet when I started working under a partner who, unknowingly, was managing Elise's estate portfolio. It was poetic, really. I wasn't good enough for their weddings, their dinners, their lineage. But soon, I would be the only one good enough to save them. And by then, they'd have no idea they were walking straight into the cage I was building around them. Brick by elegant brick. It was a Thursday. I'd just come home from a 12-hour shift. Half of it spent proofreading asset protection contracts, the other half running spreadsheets on dynastic trusts that made me want to light cigars with other people's fortunes. My phone pinged. Not a number I recognized at first. Just a soft ding, a preview of a text message I deleted before I could read it fully. But then another. And another. Then the name popped up like a corpse rising from the lake. Julian. The ex. He who proposed to my cousin with the same hands that once held my face and promised me forever. He had sent me a link. No words. Just the headline. Engagement feature. Golden couple plans, island wedding. There they were again. Elise in something white and shimmering, looking like an AI-rendered bridal magazine cover. Julian with his smirk and overpriced haircut. The caption read, "True love finds its way, sometimes where you least expect it." I didn't reply. I didn't even flinch. But 3 hours later, Elise messaged me too. Hers had more words, of course. Always the polished one. "Hey babe. I know it's been weird. I just wanted to say I hope you're doing okay. I know this was sudden, but things just clicked. We didn't mean to hurt you. I really hope we can still be friends. I mean, we're family after all." Sparkling heart. Friends. Family. Like I hadn't spent 2 decades shrinking in her shadow. Like I hadn't watched her casually collect the affection, the money, the attention, and now the man I'd loved for 5 years. Her apology wasn't about regret. It was about reputation maintenance. She wanted to stay on the moral high ground. She wanted me to forgive her publicly, to make her feel less like a villain in her own curated fairy tale. I didn't give her the pleasure. Instead, I screenshotted the messages. Filed them in a folder titled Leverage. Underneath that, subfolders named Trust Fund, Startup Finances, Prenup, if any, Weaknesses. I started cross-referencing everything. Elise had shares in 3 family-owned holding companies. Julian was hemorrhaging investor confidence on a doomed crypto wellness platform, don't ask. The irony? My firm had a background check run on his company and flagged it as high risk. I knew it was only a matter of time before they'd need help. And when that time came, I'd be waiting. Not as the girl they dumped, but as the woman with all the legal keys to the empire they were too lazy to guard. I didn't reply to either of them. I just let the silence do the talking. Because the best revenge? It doesn't scream. It whispers in paperwork and power of attorney clauses. And it always begins with a smile that says, "Of course I forgive you. Underscore 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 underscore. There's a dangerous kind of power in being forgotten. When people think you're irrelevant, they stop watching their backs. They don't see the knife coming. They hand you the keys to the vault and laugh because they think you'll never learn how to open it. That was my cousin's first mistake. The second was trusting Julian with money. I buried myself in textbooks, commercial law, fiduciary ethics, tax shelters, asset protection, LLC layering. Most people drink espresso to stay awake. I drank fury. I was done being emotional. Now I was educational. I knew if I played my cards right, I could position myself as exactly the kind of person people like Elise and Julian would need when the fantasy of their curated romance started collapsing under the weight of real-life responsibilities. Because, let's be honest, Julian? He was a walking, talking liability.
Good jawline.
Bad judgment.
And Elise?
She was so used to being adored that the very idea of someone outmaneuvering her legally would never occur to her. So I got serious. I applied for a position at a boutique wealth advisory firm, a discreet one, the kind that manages old money and new scandals. Family offices, generational trusts, shell corporations with poetic names and hideous intent. They hired me as a paralegal. I kept my head down, my voice soft, my opinions conservative. I let them underestimate me. Let them call me kid in meetings, let the older men explain things I already knew. And then I started asking questions. The kind that signaled competence without flashing ambition. It worked. Soon I was reviewing asset reports solo, sitting in on estate planning sessions, redlining trust agreements that quietly moved millions in and out of jurisdictional reach. I learned how dynasties insulate themselves from failure. I learned how the wealthy hide debt, claim bankruptcy, transfer liabilities, then celebrate at galas like nothing happened. And the more I learned, the more dangerous I became. One night, I found a familiar name on a file. Elise V. Langford. Trust, active. Assets, substantial. Oversight, loosely structured. My hands didn't shake. The partner in charge of her account, a distracted man with a trophy wife and poor password discipline, let me start handling the account's admin. I didn't alter anything.
Yet.
But I began building a map. Of assets, of legal language, of potential loopholes, and most of all, of control. Because once you're in the castle's foundation, quiet, invisible, you don't have to break the door down. You just wait until they throw a party on the roof. Then you start pulling bricks. Underscore 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 underscore. There's something sacred about having a key card to a building no one thought you'd ever step foot in. Every morning, I walked past marble walls and oil paintings of men who'd never know my name. And I smiled because I wasn't there to be known. I was there to observe, to inherit, to infiltrate. What started as a junior assistant role had evolved. I now had clients of my own, small ones at first. Startup brothers, divorced heiresses trying to untangle messy settlements. Young money trying to pretend it was old. People who confused my quiet confidence for trustworthiness. And in this world, trust was currency. I didn't wear flashy clothes.
Didn't post online.
I let my silence become an aesthetic. Behind the scenes, I was quietly shepherding millions of dollars through LLCs I'd named after Greek goddesses and obscure Italian lakes. I'd built entire empires for people who didn't know how to spell fiduciary. All while gathering receipts on the very people who had once laughed at my dreams. Elise and Julian. They were still glowing on the surface, hosting charity balls, posing in digital magazines, being called the next power couple. But I knew the truth. Julian's startup was smoke and mirrors. He had more press than profits. I'd reviewed his filings. Creative accounting, speculative valuations, and a desperate dependency on fresh investors. Elise's trust was structured poorly, outdated, barely updated since college. No succession plan. No discretionary distribution protections. No prenuptial security. If I had been her advisor, I would have torn the whole thing down and rebuilt it like a fortress. But I wasn't her advisor. Not yet. I waited for the storm I knew was coming. And one night, it arrived like fate wrapped in irony. A cold email. Casual, breezy, almost too polite. Hey, long time. Elise and I were wondering if we could pick your brain about some of our financial stuff.
We trust you.
We know you're brilliant at this. They wanted help. Help. From the girl they humiliated over wine and finger foods 3 years ago. I stared at the screen for a long moment. And then I smiled. Because here's the thing. When people finally recognize your value, it's usually because they need to exploit it. But when you know your value, you don't give it away.
You sell it.
And they were about to pay everything. Underscore 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 underscore. I almost said no. That's the honest truth. When Elise texted me the invite, I stared at it for a good 10 minutes while sipping a $7 oat milk latte I could finally afford without guilt. The message was cloying.
Polished. Predictably fake.
We're having a small dinner next Friday, just a few friends and investors. Would love to see you. It's been too long. Of course it had. It had been exactly 3 years since she wore my future like a designer gown and posed for photos while I sat outside in the cold. Now she wanted me to break bread with them.
Perfect.
I said yes. Because the thing about predators like Elise and Julian, they're addicted to the illusion of control. They only call in favors when they feel the ground shifting. And judging by the tone of her message, something was definitely cracking under their heels. The dinner was at their newly renovated penthouse. All marble and glass, with minimalist art that screamed, "We have money, but no personality." I wore black. Clean lines. A neckline just sharp enough to imply power. No jewelry, just a silver pen in my purse and a head full of leverage. Julian greeted me at the door like I was an old friend. "Damn, you look incredible." He didn't mean to flirt. He just didn't know how not to. Elise appeared a few seconds later, glass in hand, hugging me like we hadn't once shared matching diaries and then matching betrayal. "We're so glad you could come. We've really been meaning to catch up." She said it with the kind of brittle smile women wear when they're barely holding the story together. I took in the room.
The guests.
The scattered conversations about tech, venture capital, and synergistic collaborations. And then I noticed the folder sitting on their coffee table. Unlabeled. Half open. Financial statements. They were courting investors tonight, but not the kind you host when everything's going well. These were rescue investors. The kind who want equity for blood. Later, after the dinner had devolved into music and more cocktails, Julian pulled me aside on the terrace. "We've been thinking about maybe having you look over our accounts. Elise trusts you, and honestly, you probably know more about this stuff than our last advisor." I nodded slowly, watching his reflection in the glass as if I were studying a mark in a crime documentary. "Sure," I said. "Send everything to my work email. I'll take a look." He grinned, relief washing over him. He had no idea he'd just handed me the master key. Because once I had access, it wouldn't just be their finances I was untangling. It would be their lives. And I had no intention of cleaning up the mess. Only of owning it. Underscore 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 underscore. You can learn a lot from someone by how they treat documents. Julian sent over everything. Trust statements, investment summaries, asset reports, tax filings, organized like a toddler's art project. No folders. No encryption. No awareness that he was handing over the blueprint to their entire empire. Elise followed up the next morning with a cheery voice memo. "We'd love for you to help us restructure things. Everything feels so messy right now, and I trust your instincts completely." I listened to her message twice. Not for the content. For the tone. She was nervous. That thin-lipped, bright-pitched tone women use when they know they've lost grip on the narrative, but are trying to smile through it. I knew that voice. I'd lived inside it once. Not anymore. I opened their trust documents like a surgeon opening a chest cavity. Messy, outdated structures. No clarity on beneficiary rights. No contingent trustee. No specific definition for fitness in case of incapacitation. And worst of all, no oversight. They'd built an empire on vibes and social capital. But underneath it, rotting wood. So I got to work. I offered to restructure everything through my firm, smoothing out the legal inconsistencies, modernizing the asset protection clauses, and consolidating ownership under a central trust vehicle that I would manage. They were thrilled. "It's so great to have someone in the family who actually knows this stuff," Elise said.
Yes.
So great. Especially when I had full access to every decision, every clause, every contingency built into their financial future. They didn't read the new paperwork. Not really. They skimmed it, glanced over my highlighted notes, nodded during the walkthrough call. They didn't even notice the addition I made in the trustee succession clause. In the event that the primary trustees are deemed financially, mentally, or legally unfit to administer the trust, full fiduciary authority shall be transferred to the named successor trustee. Redacted, me. That was the moment I became the legal executor of their fortune. All it would take now was a spark, and they wouldn't even know they were on fire until I handed them the ashes in a monogrammed envelope. Once the paperwork was signed, everything changed. Not for them, of course. They were still blissfully ignorant, posing for Instagram, attending wine tastings, and dropping my name at brunches like I was a family success story they helped raise. But for me, everything sharpened. I was no longer a consultant. I was a silent architect. Every transaction, every donation, every collaboration they claimed was carefully orchestrated through the trust one now legally administered. When Julian wanted to invest in an NFT wellness app, he had to run it past me, technically. When Elise wanted to donate $50,000 to a charity that doubled as a PR stunt, I had to review the disbursement. When they purchased a ridiculous marble bathtub from Italy, I flagged it under non-essential trust-funded assets. They didn't question it. They didn't push back. They chalked it up to smart financial planning. What they didn't realize was this. Every financial decision now flowed through my hands. And slowly, I started tightening the valve. Just slightly. I delayed a distribution here. Flagged a compliance issue there. Recommended a spending freeze pending asset evaluation. They grumbled, sure. But they needed me more than they wanted to admit. Julian's startup was crashing. A quiet storm of broken promises and panicked investors. He hadn't told Elise yet. But I knew, because I had backdoor access to the venture's operating capital account. Meanwhile, Elise's name was losing luster in social circles. Too many partnerships with ethically murky brands. Too many whispers about misuse of charitable funds. I helped her distance herself from those, of course, by quietly liquidating those PR disasters under the guise of legal necessity. They thought I was cleaning their mess. I was actually organizing the garbage for a very public incineration. I didn't need to scream or sabotage. I just needed to continue. Unseen. Trusted. Patient. Because when you're the one quietly holding the keys, the people in the mansion don't realize it's not their house anymore. They're just renting it from the woman they betrayed. Underscore 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 underscore. Let me tell you what real power looks like. It's not a mansion. It's not a private jet. It's not a black card with a champagne logo. It's the ability to ruin someone's life by simply not signing a form. And that's exactly where I was. Every vacation they took, I booked it. Every wire transfer for their faux philanthropy galas, I authorized it. Every new investment Julian attempted, I structured it through shell companies I owned, under names they couldn't pronounce and never bothered to question. They called me their money whisperer. I called myself the ghost in their machine. They were bleeding money, drip by glamorous drip. I wasn't stealing from them. That would be petty. No, I was letting them destroy themselves while ensuring they couldn't escape the consequences. And the best part?
They thank me for it.
Elise would call me up late at night, glass of wine in hand, voice slurred just enough to sound fragile, and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you. Seriously. Everyone else wants something from us. You're the only one who's honest." I'd nod, even though she couldn't see me, because yes, I was honest. Brutally. Just not with her. Their friends started noticing cracks. Questions arose. Why were they pulling out of deals last minute? Why did the power couple suddenly miss an art auction? Where were the new cars, the new headlines, the usual shine? Julian blamed the economy. Elise said they were going minimalist. But behind every missed appearance, every quiet retraction, every closed credit line,
Was me.
they weren't broke, yet. But they were now addicted to my approval. Julian stopped making decisions without checking with me. Elise asked me to soft review her public statements before she posted them. They didn't realize that slowly, their empire was no longer shared. It was mine. Every asset, every contact, every access code, all under the smiling, silent presence of the girl they'd once humiliated like she was disposable. But ghosts don't haunt you with rage. They haunt you with paperwork. And I had every form ready to pull the floor out from under them. Every empire has a fault line. It's never the obvious stuff: money, infidelity, ego. Those are symptoms. The real fault?
Pride.
And Elise had pride in spades. Not confidence. Not self-worth.
Pride.
The brittle, glittery kind that cracks the moment it's challenged in public. So I gave it a little push. I'd been holding onto a folder for months. Nothing dramatic, just a collection of poorly documented donations, questionable invoices from Julian's startup, and a few consulting fees paid to influencers who never actually posted anything.
Sloppy.
But more importantly, illegal looking. I didn't leak it to the press.
No.
That's amateur hour. I leaked it anonymously to her board of trustees. Elise had been given a seat on her family's philanthropic trust. It was largely ceremonial until now. One anonymous whistleblower later, and suddenly her name was trending in an entirely different circle. Mismanagement, financial impropriety, conflict of interest. She called me at midnight, her voice breathless with panic. "Someone's accusing me of manipulating the foundation. This could ruin everything. Do you think, could it be one of Julian's people? Should I lawyer up?" I paused. Let her stew. Then, gently, "Let me look into it." She sighed like I'd handed her a life raft. The next day, I helped her draft a response. A beautiful one, actually.
Polished. Sincere.
Worded carefully to shift blame toward ambiguous administrative lapses. But it wasn't enough. Her reputation took the hit. She was quietly asked to step back from the foundation. No press. Just a gentle internal distancing that made her feel like she was being erased. Because she was. I watched her crack in real time, posting erratically, arguing with commenters, retreating from events. Julian didn't even notice. He was too busy trying to convince investors that his company's blockchain model was visionary. I knew better. So did the IRS. I made sure a separate folder found its way to a compliance investigator at one of his partner firms. Not fraud. Not yet. Just enough discrepancy to trigger an internal review. By the end of that week, Julian lost a major investor. Elise was off the board. And I was still receiving emails from them like nothing had happened. "Thank you for always being our rock through this."
Yes.
A rock. Heavy enough to sink them. And I hadn't even gotten started. You ever watch a person try to smile while their house is burning behind them? That's what Julian looked like in the investor Zoom call I joined as a consultant. He didn't know yet. Not fully. But he was sweating through his collar while trying to explain why certain outgoing payments didn't match up with the declared figures on his prospectus. The worst part? He still thought the issue was external. "It's just some back-end accounting issue," he chuckled. "Totally normal. We're streamlining it now." No, sweetheart. You're being audited. The official email hit his inbox an hour after that call. I made sure to see it. The subject line was simple. Regulatory review notice. Immediate response required. Not from the IRS directly, but from a partner firm's compliance department. And that's worse.
Why?
Because partner firms don't care about loyalty. They care about liability. They'll cut you loose faster than a reality TV villain at a reunion show. Julian called me, voice shaking. I think someone's trying to sabotage the company. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights flicker through my high-rise window. You think. You don't think. Elise, no, she wouldn't. Oh, this was getting delicious. Maybe someone internal? Someone with access, he asked. It's possible, I said softly. Have you considered restructuring? Shifting the controlling interest? Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't know. He sounded small. Elise, meanwhile, had gone quiet. She hadn't posted in days. I knew why. The press had caught wind of the trustee removal. A small blurb on a niche finance site, sure, but enough to bruise her brand. She'd fired her publicist in a panic. Now she was texting me hourly with half-baked statements, asking if they sounded professional. I gave her edits. I was rewriting the story while they were living it. And the best part? They still trusted me. Still CC'd me. Still paid me. They thought I was the lighthouse. But I was the storm. Because the audit? That was only the beginning. Soon, I'd move to take everything. Some people break in a scream. Elise unraveled in silence. It started with missed calls. Then postponed appearances. Eventually, even her filtered online persona vanished. No posts. No curated brunch shots. No passive-aggressive quotes about growth. Just quiet. And I knew exactly what that meant. She was unraveling. The press attention. The board ousting. The audit surrounding Julian's startup. The slow drip of financial instability she didn't know I had orchestrated. It was closing in. I received a call from her mother. The first in years. She's not doing well. She hasn't left the house.
Cries all day.
Won't eat. She thinks someone's trying to ruin her. Maybe she's right. I didn't say it aloud. But the thought made me smile. Because it meant the clause was now in play. When we rewrote her trust, I'd inserted a little-known but perfectly legal mechanism called a fitness clause. It stated that in the event of sustained emotional or mental incapacity, verified by either a board vote or medical proxy, fiduciary control would pass to the successor trustee.
Me. And now?
Elise's board had already distanced themselves. Her publicist had walked. She was under scrutiny.
So I made the call. Quiet.
Professional. Surgical. A formal petition. Enacted without drama. Within 2 weeks, I received the official notice. The trust was now mine. Entirely. The estate. The residual income. The business interests.
Her home.
Her accounts. All legally, neatly, beautifully transferred.
Julian found out the next day.
The man who left me for my cousin stormed into my office like he was entitled to answers. What the hell did you do? I looked at him the same way you'd look at someone begging for a ladder after setting their own house on fire. Clause 7C. You signed it. You tricked us. No, I said. I helped you. You just didn't read the fine print. He cursed, slammed the door. I didn't flinch, because now I owned everything they built together. And all it took was a pen. Underscore, 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 underscore. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or told you weren't enough for someone, you already know how this feels. This story isn't just revenge. It's redemption through strategy. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to Fiery Revenge for more stories like this, where power is more oft than not the ability to fully dictate one's life. Like, comment, and share what dreams of comebacks you would like to pull over people that underestimated you. Underscore 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 underscore. The first sign of collapse is never the explosion. It's the silence after the detonation, when people realize the doors won't open. That was Julian and Elise. I'd waited exactly 12 days after taking full control of the trust. Just enough time for them to think maybe things were settling. Maybe they could recover. Then I froze the accounts. Not illegally. Not even emotionally. Legally. Strategically. Per Clause 11b, which they both signed, the new trustee, me, held discretion to freeze distributions pending a reassessment of financial health and fiduciary direction. In plain English? Asterisk, if I think y'all are wasting money, I can cut the faucet. Asterisk. Julian found out while trying to pay a contractor for renovations on the pool Elise no longer swam in. His card declined 3 times. He tried another. Declined again. Elise got a notification while shopping at a boutique. Her entire Amex portfolio flagged for review. The panic started immediately. Voicemails. Emails. Screaming texts. What are you doing? This is our money. You can't do this, your family. That last one? That made me laugh. Because family is a beautiful concept until it becomes an excuse. A leash they yank when they want compliance. And I had been raised on that leash. Not anymore. I sent them one email.
Short.
Sterile. Professional. Asterisk effective immediately. All outgoing transactions will require trustee authorization. A financial audit is underway. Please direct inquiries through legal counsel. Asterisk. E.R. They were locked out. They couldn't access their accounts. Couldn't pay for the penthouse. Couldn't even cover payroll for Julian's personal assistant, who had the nerve to text me asking if I could advance her paycheck. Advance? Baby, I don't advance anything. I inherit it. That night, I sipped wine on a balcony that overlooked their building. A penthouse I now had the power to sell with a single notarized signature. And I was just getting started. Because next, I would sell it right out from under them. They say real wealth gives you freedom. But fake wealth? That's just a gilded leash. And Elise was starting to choke on hers. I knew it from the surveillance report. Not something I'd normally indulge in, but the building's concierge sent me an email, automated, routine. No recent maintenance. Package overflow at unit door. HOA concerns about unpaid fees. Unpaid. And unbothered. They were still living in the penthouse like it was theirs. Still sleeping under Italian lighting fixtures. Still sitting on crushed velvet furniture they didn't own anymore. Technically, it was my property now, purchased through the trust, consolidated under a holding company I controlled, and prepped for liquidation. They were squatters in their own dream. I scheduled a formal notice of eviction. Discreet. Legal. Emotionless. And I didn't tell them. Not yet. Instead, I paid a visit. First time back in that space since the engagement dinner. Funny how time flips the script. That day, I was the outsider watching them celebrate. Now, I walked in with a building pass, a real estate agent, and full authority to list the property. Elise was curled up on the velvet chaise, her once perfect posture gone. No makeup. No jewelry. Just a glass of something expensive and a look in her eyes that told me the story was over. At least for her. Julian was in the other room, probably pretending to take a call. That was his defense mechanism, false importance. Elise looked up. Are you here to humiliate us? I shook my head. I meant it.
No.
I'm here because you made 100 choices, and this is where they led. She blinked, bit her lip, and for the first time since this entire mess began, she looked small. Not because she was crying. Because she finally understood. This was real. There would be no fairy godmother. No reset button. No last-minute miracle. There was just me, and the silence of a house that didn't belong to her anymore. What happens now? She whispered. I looked around the room. this cavernous echo chamber of curated taste and shallow memories.
Now, I said.
You pack. The thing about luxury real estate? It sells itself, especially when the previous owners are too humiliated to contest the listing. I sold the penthouse in less than a week. A quiet, off-market deal to an art dealer who didn't care about the history, only the view. I negotiated hard because I could, and made sure the sale closed with no ceremonial flourish. Just paperwork. Just one signature.
Mine.
Julian and Elise weren't even notified until the final closing documents hit their inbox. Unit 56B, finalized transfer of ownership. Elise called me 3 times that night. I didn't answer. She emailed. You sold our home? No. I typed back. I sold my asset. You just happened to be staying there. Julian, ever the arrogant fool, tried to threaten legal action. But he knew better. He'd signed everything. There were no loopholes left. No ground to stand on. And because they defaulted on multiple maintenance fees and breached several trust stipulations, I wasn't even obligated to provide them a relocation budget. But I did. $4,000. Enough for a U-Haul and 3 nights in a mid-range Airbnb. A final gesture. They didn't thank me, and I didn't need them to, because that apartment wasn't just a property, it was the last pillar of their illusion. The glass fortress where they hosted the dinner that broke me. The skyline they believed made them untouchable. The life they thought I could never afford.
Now, it was just another transaction.
And I moved on like it never mattered. Because it didn't. Not really. The real victory was knowing they woke up the next morning in someone else's borrowed space, small, bitter, and finally aware that the empire they built together had one name on the deed.
Mine.
Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't plan on going back to the storage unit. It wasn't necessary. Everything of value had been cataloged, sold, or archived. Elise and Julian hadn't bothered to clear it out before the eviction, and technically, the contents were now trust property. But something about that space, it tugged at me, like the final drawer in a house you no longer live in. So I went. The attendant handed me the keys and offered help. I declined. This wasn't a moment for witnesses. Inside was the usual: vintage luggage, branded boxes, framed photos no longer fit for mantles. I scanned the shelves without emotion until I saw it. A white garment bag. The kind they use for couture gowns. I knew what it was before I unzipped it. The dress. The wedding dress Elise wore when she married Julian. The same one she once gushed about. Imported. Custom-tailored. Insured. And once, years ago, I had tried it on. Before all this. Back when we were still pretending we were sisters, back when we believed in things like forever. I remembered laughing in front of the mirror, both of us in her room, 12 and smug, talking about someday. She'd said, "You'd look beautiful in this." And I had. Now, it looked like a relic. Stiff. Pretentious. Out of place in a life that had already moved on. I didn't hesitate. I carried it to the building's private incinerator, a courtesy unit for discarding high-value items. I didn't record it, didn't make a ceremony of it. I simply folded the gown like old linens, fed it into the flame, and stood back as it curled, blackened, and dissolved. Not because I was angry, but because I was free. That dress wasn't a symbol of what I lost. It was a monument to everything I outgrew. And I was done wearing grief like it still fit. Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't want to see them again. Not in person. Not over Zoom. Not even by accident. But I did owe them one last thing. Not for closure. They didn't deserve closure. But for clarity. So I wrote them a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter. On thick paper. The kind used for inheritance notices or cease and desists. I mailed 2 copies. One to the P.O. box Julian was now using for what was left of his startup. The other to the modest apartment Elise had moved into, rented under her maiden name, as if that would erase the past. The letter read, underscore 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 underscore. To Elise and Julian, you didn't ruin me. You refined me. You showed me what happens when love is transactional, when family is opportunistic, and when trust is weaponized. And for that, I thank you, because without the 2 of you, I might have still been that girl waiting for someone else to hand her a future. Instead, I built one. And then I bought yours. You took everything you could from me. Time, dignity, my place at the table. But you forgot one thing. I was always watching. And I never forget. You don't need to respond. This isn't a negotiation. It's a statement. The empire is mine. Your legacy is a memory. And your relevance ended the moment you called me just family. Consider this my final act of generosity. Silence.
Yar.
Underscore 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 underscore. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't need to. The silence that followed, that was the signature. Because they never replied. And that told me everything. Underscore 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 underscore. The funny thing about people like Elise and Julian? They were addicted to attention but allergic to accountability. They built their lives on being admired, posed for magazine shoots, sponsored charity galas, gave interviews with perfectly curated sob stories about humble beginnings. And now, they were falling, and the world couldn't look away. The gossip blogs got there first. Quiet whispers about financial misconduct. A few leaked screenshots. Nothing major, until a former investor of Julian's finally snapped and posted a full thread on Twitter. They pitched us a dream. We gave them $500,000. They ghosted. No product. No exit strategy. Just vibes and free wine. It went viral. The headline in one financial blog summed it up perfectly. From power couple to Ponzi casualties, the rise and collapse of Julian and Elise. I didn't plan it. I didn't have to. I'd simply emptied the vault and let their past come rushing in to fill the silence. By the time the press really latched on, Elise had locked her social media. Julian went radio silent. Their so-called power couple reputation crumbled like wet plaster. And me? I played the role of the distant cousin trying to help manage the aftermath. I gave one brief statement to a journalist. It's always sad when legacy is squandered. I only hope to honor what the family once stood for. That quote ended up on 3 different news sites and one women's leadership podcast. I wasn't famous. I was respected. They, who once bathed in the spotlight, had become punchlines. But I had become the story behind the story. The architect. The one they should have never underestimated. And for the first time in years, the family, the extended orbit of Langfords, distant aunts, silent uncles, began reaching out. We're so proud of how you've handled things. You've shown such poise. You always had it in you.
No.
I didn't always have it in me. They put it in me. Every dismissal, every snub, every dinner party, I wasn't invited to. They built this. They just didn't realize I'd inherited the blueprints. Underscore 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 underscore. There was no coronation, no ribbon cutting, no golden spotlight. No moment of applause. Just silence. Respectful, cautious, reverent silence. And I liked it better that way. Because I wasn't looking for vindication. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to become. When Elise and Julian fell off the radar, the vacuum they left behind was massive. The foundation Elise once sat on needed new leadership. The family businesses, those boring, generational entities she ignored, still needed oversight. The elders turned to me, quietly,
Politely.
suddenly remembering I existed. You've proven yourself. We need your clarity. We'd like to bring you on as a partner. I didn't gloat. I didn't say yes immediately either. I negotiated. I demanded equity, not just a title. I restructured their outdated systems. I brought in modern advisors, replaced crony hires with actual talent, and gutted the old-school favor culture from the top down. What I built wasn't flashy. It was sustainable. And they noticed. My name, once the afterthought, now sat beside theirs on boardroom doors. My voice carried in strategy meetings. My presence was requested, not suggested. The same family that once said I didn't fit the image now called me the future. And as for Elise, her name never came up. Not once. She had vanished. Not exiled, forgotten. And Julian? He was a ghost haunting the ruins of failed investments and cold email pitches that went unanswered. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need revenge. Because legacy is not inherited by birthright. It's earned in silence. In rooms no one thinks you'll ever enter, doing the work they never thought you'd understand. And now, the family name still existed. But when people said Langford, they didn't think of Elise. They thought of me. I hadn't been back to the beach villa since that night. The night of the engagement. The betrayal. The beginning of it all. The house looked the same. The stone driveway. The iron gate. The palms that framed the horizon like gossiping sentinels. But everything about it felt different now. Because this time, I didn't arrive with a suitcase and hope in my heart. I arrived with ownership papers. The estate had come up for sale during a quiet off-market negotiation. The family had fallen into a liquidity crisis, one they didn't want the public to see. So they liquidated what they could without headlines. Of course, I had a proxy firm waiting. And just like that, the villa where they crowned my cousin their princess became mine. I stepped through the archway alone. No family. No fiancé. No performance. Just peace. I ran my fingers across the banister where Elise had once posed for photos. Walked into the dining room where Julian announced their engagement. Sat beneath the same chandelier that had flickered above their smiling faces while I sat outside, forgotten.
Now?
The place was empty. And it had never felt so full of power. I went upstairs, found the old guest room I used to stay in, still painted in the same pale blush my aunt said was appropriate for girls like me. I opened the window, let the ocean air fill the room, and smiled. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't about shouting or fireworks or burning bridges. It's inheriting the bridge, setting a toll, and watching from your estate as they struggle to afford the crossing. Elise kept her name. She still had it printed on designer luggage she no longer traveled with. But I owned the family seat, the villa, the legacy, the final word. Underscore 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 underscore